Welcome to the Darkstream, Vox Day, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. Thanks for firing it up. We have the UATV chat rolling. DLive, not sure about that. I'm told audio and video is good, so DLive is good too. I was thinking about what separates people in their fundamental approach to communications with other humans, with social interactions, and all that sort of thing. Especially in light of the way that, as I've gotten older, I've gotten less and less interested in social interaction in general. Not that I was necessarily, particularly social, especially when I was younger, but I learned the rules over time. I figured out what modes of conversation worked, what modes didn't. I was studying other people from a bit of an outsider's perspective quite early on. And even though I didn't really figure it out until I was probably 15, to a reasonable extent, I must have been able to figure out certain things, because I do remember, despite being someone who's not even on much of the social radar, I did manage to get elected student body vice president in 5th grade. In retrospect, that was mostly because I was smart enough to realize that everybody was going to run for president, and it'd be a lot less competitive running for vice president. And sure enough, most of the people that I was running against were not in the top 2 or 3 tiers of popularity at the time. The master politician was the kid who ran for it and was elected president. He was actually on my hockey team, and a very charming guy, had kind of red hair, sharp features. He was very vulpine, very fox-like, and quick-witted, not highly intelligent, but quick, verbally quick. And it was funny because everyone had to get up and give their little speeches. And he got up there and he promised that he was going to make sure that recess was longer, and that there would be candy in the the cafeteria every day. And so it was pretty amazing. So Nebula says he's looking up vulpine. Vulpine means fox-like. So for example, in Italian, the fox is volpe. So I'm pretty sure it stems from the Latin. So in any event, I was beginning to figure out how people worked. I was appalled at the time. What was his name? I think it was Steve Redlinger. He even had reddish hair. And Steve Redlinger, very likable kid, popular, not among the very most popular, but quite popular. Always friendly and decent to everybody. But I remember thinking, how can he promise that? We don't have, there's no way that we have that kind of power on the student council. I can't believe we have that kind of power on the student council. If we had that kind of power on the student council, surely some kids before us would have used it to make recess longer, anyhow, I asked him about that. I said, how did you promise that? And he said, well, we don't know that it's not possible. So that was a real lesson to me in how people are easily manipulated. But it was also a lesson to me in how people justify their manipulations of others. So if you think about it, I was already very, very dimly and in a totally unaware fashion taking my first steps on the understanding of Aristotelian rhetoric and how it relates to influencing others. And even at the time, I wasn't interested in following that path. I had the natural dialectician's suspicion of rhetoric and the who tried hardest to break your spirit? No one tried when I was a kid. Nobody tried to break my spirit. Nobody did. But the natural hierarchy doesn't favor all of us equally. If you're small, if you're smart, and you're not sufficiently socially mature to understand that people don't want, people are not favorably impressed if you know all the answers. You're not supposed to raise your hand first every time you know the answer. That's one of the hardest things, I think, for an intelligent young child to learn, is that for whatever reason, human society does not value intellectual demonstration or demonstrations of intellectual power the way that they value demonstrations of athletic power. Because when you're a kid, when you're smart, the same urge to play well on the playground and win a sports game on the playground, it's the same drive to raise your hand and ooh, me, I know the answer. I mean, to this day, I don't really understand what the difference is. I don't, but we don't need to understand these things. We just need to know that they are the way they are. And it doesn't take that long. But I mean, my social advancement can be seen in the way that by the time I got to fourth grade, I was already sitting in the back of the room and reading a book instead of listening to the teacher. I had learned that raising my hand and knowing the answer was going to make me unpopular. It was going to make me disliked. So I had the common sense to stop doing that. But the first level of social maturity, and what I mean by social maturity here is the effectiveness of your core approach to others. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with maturity, with intellectual maturity, or with temporal maturity, or emotional maturity. It's fundamentally about your interactions with others. And the first level of social maturity is that your core perspective on relating to others is about yourself. When you walk into a room, your first thought is, how are people reacting to me? How do I look to other people? And this is obviously the juvenile or the most juvenile, the lowest form of social maturity. It is a form of social maturity. Some maturation has taken place because you are aware that others exist. The child doesn't really. The child is almost perfectly solipsistic. But he gradually becomes aware of others. He gradually becomes aware that he is being observed and judged by others. And that's when everybody reaches that first level of social maturity. They start thinking, what are others thinking about me? And this can be a matter of very, very deep concern. And I've personally always find it really troubling when people are excessively concerned about this. I was talking with a young man once, and he was explaining how important it was to him to belong at the time. Something to the tune of, I don't care if I'm the clown or if I'm the butt of the joke. At least I'm included. At least I'm part of the gang. And I could understand that because I remember, being the, omega, the low man on the totem pole. But I never wanted to belong enough that I was willing to pay really any price. I mean, I don't mean that. I don't mean the opposite of, I'm willing to pay any price. I'm not willing to pay any price, but I'm willing to pay some price. I'm saying I just wasn't willing to pay any price at all because I didn't value it enough. Now, it has been explained to me, and I generally accept and understand the fact that that's actually probably a flaw on my part. It's probably a combination of very low status at a very young age, being treated not very well at a very young age, and then also having parents who had very high expectations, and were more tended to operate more on the highly critical side. Now, please understand, this is not any sort of sob story or any sort of, oh, woe is me, poor me, that sort of thing. I don't remember most of this stuff. This is only like in talking about it with my friends and talking about it with family members and piecing things together that the picture kind of comes complete, because from my perspective, that's the only way it's ever been. Bilbo Swaggin says childhood neglect helps cause fear of missing out and issues seeking acceptance. Well, that's one way to do it, but I'm not what I'm talking about here is not at all neglect. It's I was not neglected. I had parents who cared about me, loved me, were perfectly willing to do anything for me, but their personalities were such and the situation was such that they were not they were not inclined to be what I would call emotionally supportive. This isn't a criticism or a complaint, and frankly, I'm extremely grateful to however it worked out, because we'll get to this later, but to me, when I look at what that concern, that obsession for what other people think causes people to do and feel, it feels like a superpower to not have to deal with that, you know. But as I said, or as I've been told, just because you were broken in a way that turned out to be a positive doesn't mean that nothing was broken. It's not normal. You can't expect normal people to go to that point, you know. And but this also explains why it's so difficult to convince people, even when you can tell somebody 1,000 times, I don't care. You know, it makes no difference. And because, you know, most people who are not sociopathic or emotionally broken in some way care so much about what other people think. It's normal for people to care what other people think, especially not even if, or especially the narcissist. Narcissists are obsessed with what other people think. They don't it doesn't influence what they want. They may be perfectly willing to walk over the dead bodies of every friend, acquaintance, and family member to get what they want. But their sense of self is such that they're incredibly concerned about what everyone around them thinks. They spend an inordinate amount of time trying to manipulate everybody to make them see them the way they want to be seen. Because again, this is the first stage, right? So the first stage is you care about what other people think of you. You know, Anthony says, me and a girl named Carrie hid our academic success so well, people thought we stole our honor cards. Right, but see, what you can see there is Anthony and Carrie cared greatly about what people thought, how they were perceived. You know, if you don't care what people think, you just you'll go ahead and you're not going to hide anything. You're not going to hide your academic success. You're not going to hide your athletic prowess. Now, to be clear, that wasn't what I was doing when I said that I stopped raising my hand and all that. I didn't care one way or the other about what they thought, but I understood it was not a good idea to wave a red flag in front of a bull. Anthony sends a super chat. Thank you, Anthony. He says, yup. Yeah, and again, this is not a criticism. I'm attempting to describe normal, the development of normal human psychology, you know, or what I perceive it to be, because this is not from any book. This is not from any, you know, school of psychological thought. It's not a model. On the other hand, it's more observably correct than anything you'll ever read in Freud. So, you know, there you go. But what I realized is that what I missed, for those various reasons given, was that first level of social maturity. Because what's the second level of social maturity? Where do you finally eventually get? Where does the normal person finally eventually get? You know, when after the woman goes through menopause, after the guy retires. You know, what is the what is the end result for most people that they finally get to after all this time? What do you hear again and again and again from, you know, old women, old men? They finally get to the age where they don't give a damn. You know, Hugh Hefner finally decides, you know what? I'm just going to wear pajamas from now on. I'm rich. I've done all these things. I've dated all these movie stars. What else is there to do? Well, first thing is, I'm not going to get dressed. I'm going to keep my pajamas on, damn it. But this is even though it's much more typical that people only reach that as they're approaching the end of their lives, it is actually a step in this social maturation process. Because the reality is, and here's the key thing, and I think that this is really, really important and really, really advantageous to internalize. When you walk into that room, and that first stage of maturity, that first level is thinking, how do I look? How am I being perceived? You know, what are they thinking of me? What are they? Surely everyone has noticed that I have entered the room, right? What's the reality? If there's 10 people in a room and you're just the average guy or girl, how many of them are actually going to look at you when you walk in? Especially if they're already engaged socially in some manner. 2, 3? How much do they care? Well, if they're not rushing towards you and folding you in their arms, if they're not shouting out gleefully, hey, look who just walked in. The party can start. If they're not doing that, then you're going to begin to grasp that second stage thing, which is that nobody cares. Nobody's interested. No one is even paying attention. Collectively, actually I should say individually, we are all that gorilla in that video that runs through the basketball court and nobody even notices because they're so caught up in watching the people pass the basketball. Personally, I was always dubious about that because when I watched the videos, I was like, you know, they were like, watch this video and count the times that people pass the ball. So it's like, dun, 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 dun. And I would always mess up because I would stop counting when the gorilla showed up. I'm like, what the fuck's a gorilla doing in here? You know? And then afterwards, like, did you see the gorilla? I'm like, yes, there was a gorilla in the video. How could anyone not see the video? Then you know, it turns out that apparently a lot of people are so focused on the one thing that they don't see that. Austin says, and he's being weirdly and suspiciously particular, wearing a headlamp to situations that don't require them will get a lot of eyes on you. Especially in the dark, Austin, especially in the dark. But you know, it is so freeing to people to stop worrying about that. I mean, think about it. Think about when you were younger and you were more sensitive to what others thought of you. Think about how much easier life is, how much better you feel now that you don't care as much, right? Now imagine how totally freeing it is to not care at all. I'm not talking about the sociopathic way. And also, here's the other thing that people tend to get confused with. They tend to think not caring about what other people think of you means that you don't care about them. It's not true. These are totally different things. I don't care about what any of our Ridgebacks think about Aristotle. I, I literally could not care less what they think about it. As it happens, I could also not care less about what anyone in my personal social circle thinks about a great number of things. Not at all. I don't care what Space Bunny might think about, you know, Neoplatonism versus Aristotelianism. I don't care what my father thinks about unrestricted warfare and the proper way to define the hypothetical fifth generation warfare. I know them well enough to know that they have as close to complete ignorance on those topics as is possible. They know nothing about it. So why would that opinion make any difference to me? Now, does that mean I don't care about them? No, not at all. It's a category error to attempt to equate or somehow other relate those aspects of disinterest. You know, now obviously, you know, these things can be taken to various extremes. A lot of you have probably noticed, if you've read my books and that sort of thing, that I'm not particularly receptive to praise. I'm also not particularly receptive to criticism. Because frankly, you know, it doesn't make any difference what anybody thinks about a book I've already written. It's done. It is what it is. You know, and being someone who is capable of being objective about myself and about my work, you're probably not going to tell me anything that I'm not going to know. It's possible. I mean, sometimes people come up with a take, or they come up with something that I missed, and that's really useful. That's why I sent the book out to 10 early readers and a proofreader to go through, and you know, some of them did a really good job of spotting little continuity errors. Hey, in this chapter you're calling this person this, and this you seem to have forgotten that you killed off this character in the first chapter in which he appeared in. You know, you should probably make it somebody else that you killed off, since he appears in the rest of the book. That, or there's a very different theme here going on that you seem to be portraying. You know, Nebula said, "Come on, Vox wanted positive feedback for Booster Patrol." I mean, not particularly. You know, I mean, I wanted you guys to like it, but I don't know how the feedback was helpful. You know, I mean, you don't need to tell me that my voice is mediocre, you know, or that John's a good guitarist, or that E-Rock's solos are amazing. You know, again, it's not about. You have to distinguish the difference between being emotionally vested in other people's opinions versus not valuing them for a specific purpose. You know, I would like it if everybody liked everything that I wrote. I know it's never going to happen. You know, I would like it if I liked every book of other people that I read. That's not going to happen either. You know, some people are more naturally libertarian than others. Other people are more naturally controlling than others. Some people are more naturally stoic or more naturally sensitive. And, you know, I mean, if I was emotionally sensitive, there's no way that I would be putting out, music with John with my voice on it, because it's not that good. You know, it just, I mean, listen to the difference between, I mean, it's not like I can't hear the difference between my voice and Paul's, you know? I mean, mine probably just barely in certain songs gets past the fingernails on the chalkboard level. It is what it is. I wish it was better, but it's not. So, I'm 55. This is not news at this point, right? It's just fun to do. It's a blast to do. Um, I'm hoping to get back to doing more of it in the new year. Um, Powers That Bear said, I could sense the genuine shock when your songs were requested most. Yeah, that did puzzle me at first. Um, you know, it's not that I don't comprehend the, you know, artist, fan, celebrity, supporter relationship. I get it. I sometimes forget the ways that it applies in specific situations. You know, um, in a world where art comes first, then uh, we should only have Rachel singing certain songs and Elizabeth singing other songs, and maybe I could do the more human than human, right? Um, but we're not in that world. We're in a world where the people that listen to Booster Patrol are part of this fan community, as it were, and therefore I need to do more than I should from a purely musical perspective. And obviously, as John Bradley would be the first to point out, I haven't exactly been holding up my end of the deal lately, um, which is totally true. And I'm totally unapologetic because of the stuff that we've been working on, right? But anyhow, the point is that the second stage of social maturity is you don't care what other people think. You understand. Not only do you not care what other people think, you don't care what other people think because you understand that they don't really care about you. They don't really care about you. They don't really care about what you're doing unless and until it has a negative impact on them in some way. Then they care a lot. This is in general. Obviously, people who have a burning need to control others, who have a burning need to meddle in the activities of others, they're going to meddle and they're going to interfere. Whether that constitutes caring what you think, or caring about what you do, maybe it does. I don't really see it as being the same thing that most people are thinking of when they think about, what is this person, think about what I'm doing. For example, if you've got somebody in your life who is just negative all the time, you don't have to think about what they're going to think. They're going to be negative about everything. In fact, and I've tried to point this out to people, especially those who tend to be inclined to a negative or contrarian, or who have a negative or contrarian personality, is the fastest way to make everybody totally indifferent to what you say and do is to be negative all the time. Because if you're negative all the time, they know what you're going to say. You don't ever need to talk because everybody knows what you're going to say before you say it. Secondly, a significant percentage, maybe even the majority of people, aren't going to want to be around you. You know, if you're somebody who enjoys saying no, if you're someone who enjoys raining on other people's parade, if you're somebody who just instinctively says no right away, remember, disagreeable, someone who disagrees with others, is literally a synonym for dislikable. If you disagree all the time, people will always dislike you. It doesn't mean that you have to be a Pollyanna. It doesn't mean that you have to wildly and enthusiastically embrace every stupid thing that somebody says. I mean, look at me. I am notorious for not suffering fools gladly or even at all. But would you describe me as being negative, as a negative personality, as a negative person, or as a contrarian? Maybe an economic contrarian. But that's a different matter altogether. The point is that being negative all the time is actually worse than being positive all the time. And being positive all the time is something that we rightly parody as a form of insanity. Personally, I think that people who are being negative all the time are actually closer to genuine insanity than the Pollyannas. Powers That Bear says, the extreme end of pessimists are awful. To be well-rounded includes some pessimism. Well, certainly. I mean, I'm very pessimistic about Ukraine. I know a few Ukrainian people. I would call them friends, friendly acquaintances, something in that room, that area. But I'm extremely pessimistic about it. It's appropriate there. It's accurate there. But and I have to admit, I am probably a little too negative when people talk about their business ideas. Now, in my defense, I would point out that 98% of all the business ideas I hear from people are retarded. I mean, literally retarded, and generally require a near complete level of ignorance to even formulate them in the first place. And then 1% of the time, the ideas are just something I don't understand at all. I mean, to the point, like, for example, my dad taught a class decades ago. And he's a very, very successful business guy. The church said, hey, would you help out? We've got a lot of people that want to start their own businesses. Would you, talk to them and see if you can give them some useful advice? And, he had them all write down on a piece of paper what their dream business was. And I remember, and it's a little bit ironic because we were kind of laughing at this poor person. I had no idea who it was, keep in mind. It wasn't like any confidences were being breached. But the idea was, it would be really great to have a business selling clean water to people. And my dad was like, let me get this straight. You want to sell clean water to people? Yeah. And they really did. And he said, well, why? And the person said, well, clean water is just such a blessing. We need it for life. It's such a blessing. Keep in mind, we're living in Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, which is actually an underestimate because there's really 12,000 lakes, pretty much all of which you can drink right out of. And, the suburbs that this church was in was not exactly deprived of indoor plumbing and tap water, which was perfectly good. So my dad was just like, but that people get their water practically for free by turning on the tap. And they're like, oh, yes. Isn't it wonderful? It's like, where is the business? Like you're gonna start a business bringing clean water to people who already get it for free? Why don't you just go into the business of selling oxygen? But the funny thing is, of course, this was a long time ago. And then the whole thing with Evian starts. Suddenly people in the US who could drink perfectly good clean water right from the tap were buying expensive French bubbly water. So that was a good lesson to me in understanding that even the dumbest, craziest business ideas can work if they're presented in the proper way. Now, the whole thing with bottled water, of course, makes tons more sense. And yeah, you could potentially do it in the States just with if you were selling non-fluoridated water. There's probably a market for non-fluoridated water now that the boomers are not making all the household decisions, and Gen X and the younger generations are a little bit more skeptical about whether it's good for them to have all this, birth control pills and fluoride and who knows what else in the water. So it's this, what I thought and what my dad thought was the absolute dumbest business idea that we'd ever heard is something that you could actually make a business case for. So that's a good lesson, that to always moderate your skepticism, even if your skepticism is totally justified in every way. So let's get to the third level. The first level is, you're focused on yourself. You care about what other people think. At the second level, you have learned to no longer care about what they think. So the third level is teaching yourself to act in a manner as if you care about what they think. What I mean act, to comport yourself in a manner that allows people to believe you care about what they think. And I'm not saying this in a for the purposes of manipulation. I'm saying that this is simply for the purposes of making life more pleasant for yourself and for others. Because I always thought that the best thing that you could do for somebody is leave them alone. You know, there's so many things that I wanted to do, so many things that I was I wanted to um, I wanted to write, I wanted to read. You know, pretty much all of my favorite activities that didn't involve sports were solitary by preference. You know, um, my next door neighbor was a good basketball player, and his absolute favorite thing to do was just to be out there in his side in the driveway shooting hoops. And he was a couple of years older than me. He was always very nice. Um, you know, if you went over and wanted to shoot hoops with him or play with him or something, he was always amenable. But there was always this just split second of, and it had nothing to do with me being younger, because I noticed over time it was the same with everybody. You know, he just liked to be in that zone. I think that it's kind of like the way that you feel when you're playing a video game. And when you get into the zone, and you know it, you transcend the physical sensations, and you're just, you know, one with the flow. They actually call it flow. And you know, if you're someone who, you know, regardless of what the activity is, if you're someone who has the ability to put yourself into that state of flow, then it's something that you tend to sort of naturally seek. You know, somebody once said something about you know oh, do you find it difficult living in a foreign language culture, et cetera, and that sort of thing. And I just looked at her for a second because I didn't really understand the question. And then when I understood what she was asking, I said, no, it's not an issue at all. You know, I don't have a particularly active social life. Um, and then and then Space Bunny said something about, and what little social life I have is mostly pressed on me. Um, and you know, she was clearly looking at me with complete sympathy and just, what sort of lonely hell does this person live in? And I laughed, and I went and got a throne of bones and pointed it out. And I said, you can't be social and write books that big. You know? She's like, oh, okay, I get it. You know? You know, and so uh, it's good to foster connection. You know, I'm not a, if you've read The Altar of Hate, and specifically Shinjuku Satan, that story, then I think that you will appreciate that I don't take E.M. Forster's motto, only connect, too seriously. To be honest, in addition to being something to explore cyberpunk, that story openly mocks Foster's motto. But see, I'm dubious about what Arwen the Wizard Bear says. He's talking about, I always had an affinity for Vulcans in Star Trek. What I have found, and this is probably why people are so dubious about people falsely claiming that they don't care about things, is that most people that claim to be very rational and who idolize Spock and whatever are actually really, really sensitive and highly narcissistic. So, you know, just because you're in what really startled me was the first time that I discovered that unattractive fat girls were quite often way more haughty, proud, and narcissistic than popular pretty girls. It was really bizarre. Arwen says the narcissism part is a good observation. Well, that touches on what I mentioned before. If you are a narcissist, many narcissists care a great deal about what other people think of them. There's a difference between the narcissist and the solipsist and the sociopath. They're three very different psychologies, but from the outside they might look similar. I mean, you're probably going to laugh at me now because everybody always does, but I'm not a sociopath. My mother did have me tested. But as you can see, I'm nothing like a Sheldon. Because it's interesting that they talk about Sheldon not being a sociopath, but he's clearly lacking in empathy for the most part. It might surprise you to know, but I'm actually highly empathetic. I pay attention. I can feel what other people are feeling. I'm just not intellectually interested in it. See, this doesn't surprise me. Arwen says, I broke myself apart over what other people thought of me when I was a preteen. Then I had to rebel against myself to stop obsessing. Yeah, see, you do care about what other people think. You care a lot. You've hardened yourself against it. But that's fundamentally different than just not caring. I mean, there's what's the best way to, I mean, I use this example a lot and nobody seems to take it very seriously, but I really think it's the best way to understand it. And keep in mind my relationship with dogs in general and our dogs in particular. When I say that I don't care about somebody's opinion about what I think or what I say any more than I do about the dogs, it doesn't mean there's any lack of empathy, any lack of interest, any lack of concern, caring, and love. It's just a category error. I was reasonably criticized recently because I can't explain anything to anyone. And we were having a bit of an argument. And, I was irritated enough that I let the mask slip a little bit. I said, I can't be expected to explain everything to people who are too retarded to see and understand, or to see the obvious. I mean, how many of you understood what I was writing about with regards to Amazon? Like, how many of you really grasp, in your opinion, what Amazon is doing and how Amazon has destroyed what used to be a healthy and profitable ebook market for a lot of people? go ahead. This is not a test or anything. I'm just curious to know, if after reading that, did it make sense to you? Now, it might help you understand better where I'm coming from if I explain to you that I understood that instinctively back in 2014 when Kindle Unlimited was first announced. You can read that I'm skeptical and concerned about it from the very beginning, right? And then you notice, despite our success on there, I start pulling all of our books off in 2016. And so, and this was before it was completely obvious about what happened. It was before the results happened. And then, what really drove it all home for me was just reading that, single point of data. So basically all I really needed was 2 data points, and I was able to immediately understand the full implications, to the extent that concerned me, to such an extent that we went and did something as extreme as taking all of our ebooks off Kindle, getting into a type of physical book that Amazon couldn't touch, right? So think about the fact that the difference between being able to see something and grasp the implications on the basis of 2 data points, whereas you still can't explain it, where some people still can't understand it, even when it's been explained in what I would consider to be a borderline insulting manner. And that's the communications problem. And when you run into that problem again and again and again and again about practically everything, how do you think it's even possible to have an interest or a concern about what those people are thinking? It's just impossible. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've worked over the last 2 years. I have, as far as I'm aware, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I have essentially stopped discussing in any way my intelligence per se. I'm not talking about like something you can infer from something else I'm saying, but I'm saying that I've stopped reminding people of that. And the reason was because, as it was explained to me, I was trying to be polite. And that's what a lot of people don't realize when some people are when they're reminding you of their intelligence. What most people don't realize is they're trying to politely not call you a retard. Now, not always. Obviously, you got the gammas and you got the midwits who are posturing and all that sort of thing. I'm not talking about that. It's like when some mid-witted biologist would say, "Well, you just don't understand what natural selection by evolution is, or natural evolution, or evolution by natural selection is." You're like, what are the chances of that? Precisely what step, do you think I'm missing if you think I'm not understanding it correctly, by all means, explain it. And what's funny is that they would always retreat. Well, I mean, I did, it's complicated. Like, it's really not. Sam says, still baffled by how dumb biologists are. Biologists are literally the stupidest of all the science majors. I mean, geologists are smarter than biologists. Biologists in many elite American universities don't even have to take any serious math. They don't need calculus. They don't take calculus because they can't do it. And they never study statistics. O says educated into retardation. No, they're not. They're just not very intelligent in the first place. They have the lowest, when I say that they've always had the lowest SATs. Biology is to science majors as children's education is to liberal arts majors. They're just not very smart, and they don't have to be. Let's see here. It says, I don't quite follow what he said. So it was a turnoff to my wife, but these streams aren't for her. Okay. I am more interested in if what you say makes sense or is right. Well, yeah, I mean, I can imagine, if you're someone who is looking to be affirmed, if you're someone who is looking to feel good about yourself, I'm not the right, you're probably not the right audience for me. I'm mostly curious about how things operate and how things flow together in patterns, which is one reason why I'm very, very suspicious of pretty much all modern physics, because just from the time I was in high school, it has had the same sort of stink of nonsense. All the quantum mechanics, dark matter, blah, 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 all that stuff. To me, it just stinks of the same faux science, pseudo-intellectualism that surrounds biology. I fully expect that at some point in the next 100 years, the entire model of the entire physical model of the universe is going to be completely and utterly torn apart, as completely as Darwinian evolution by natural selection is being torn apart. What's destroyed Darwin and what's destroyed evolution is genetic testing, genetic science. Some sort of technology is going to appear that is going to do the same thing to physics before too long. So, remember in uni seeing some gender studies woman lecture through a window on fall logocentrism. Ma'am, you're arguing against science. Well, I think it's worse than that. I think science itself, professional science itself, is basically being unmasked as a charade. Nsteb says, yep, studied physics. Your intuition on that is awesome. It already has been torn apart. I'm not surprised. It's Show Me Bear says, well, obviously Vox doesn't know about all that unmeasurable matter that makes the calculations work. Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, I was dubious before they even started, publishing their fudge factors and that sort of thing. Um, but it's uh, and here's the thing. I was talking to a friend about this the other day. I realized that the whole Jewish genius thing was just a big PR campaign. After I read Saul Bellow and I read Chaim Potok, who was good, who was my favorite out of all of the you know great Jewish novelists of the 20th century. Um, I read Herman Wouk. I read, um, and what did it for me, the two that did it for me were Saul Bellow and Philip Roth, uh, who not only, I always enjoy telling people that I'm the best author and I'm the best novelist to ever to ever graduate from Bucknell University. And then people, people say, well, but what about Philip Roth? I'm like, Philip Roth didn't write well enough to be published in the Penthouse Forum. You know, Philip Roth was a failed Penthouse Forum writer. He's not a great novelist in any way, shape, or form. And uh, and what I realized is that, and then Freud, we found out that Freud's a total fraud. And so we're going to, to the extent that it hasn't been publicly admitted, we're going to find out that Einstein and a bunch of his other compadres in the hard sciences are going to turn out to be the same type of wildly overrated frauds. And the only reason that their science is mainstream is because, uh, for PR purposes. You um, it's just, it's just so nonsensical. Um, yeah, so it's really it's really amazing to see what you're able to comprehend once the patterns become available. You know, um, computational genomics is already slaughtering the out of Africa there. Yeah, I mean the thing is, the more true knowledge we have, the more fake knowledge will be dissipated. And it's not. And the interesting thing is, it's not religion that is going to go away. It's not philosophy that's going to go away. It's this total nonsense. Can you imagine? Think about this. It wasn't that long ago that Richard Dawkins actually said that science should be used to determine in the place of juries. Can you even imagine that? Who would believe that anymore post COVID? I mean, there were plenty of us calling that out as bullshit at the time. You can see me mocking it openly in The Irrational Atheist, written in 2009, or maybe 2008. Anyhow, um, it was nonsense at the time, but it's obvious nonsense now. Austin says it's a very economic way of thinking to see things in trends and patterns. Honestly, I think it's the only way. You know, I mean, you know, my wife likes to say, um, you can say whatever you want, but what matters is what you do. What you do sends more powerful messages than what you happen to say. Obviously, and there are exceptions. There are certain things you can say that will be conclusive and definitive. Um, but in general, you can assure you can tell somebody 100 times, "Oh, I just really want the kitchen to be spotless." But if you never do the dishes and never take out the trash, well, that sends a pretty strong message the opposite way. Um, Yeah, see, I disagree. Godless evolution, globe Earth is actually religion. No, it's not. I mean, it's just. Um, I know people love to say, well, atheism's really a religion. It's not. It's it's not even really a philosophy, much less a religion. Um, I suggest you look up the definition of what a religion is, rather than try to. I realize that people like to go for the pithy rhetorical inverse, but um, that's rhetoric. It's not dialectic. Yeah. Um, Sam is right. Atheism is merely a symptom of autism. You know, people who are atheists are broken. They have and it's not their fault in most cases. They can't make that connection. You know, I mean, I'm actually pretty sympathetic, a lot more sympathetic to them than I used to be, because what I realize is that for the atheist, trying to trying to accept the reality of God is, for me, like trying to distinguish between a shade of green and orange that I can't see, or to care about what somebody thinks about my about the existence of the social sexual hierarchy. You know, they can't see it, they can't feel it. Now, here's where I fault the atheists, and this is why you don't see very many highly intelligent atheists. It's because even if you can't feel it yourself, even if you have something broken within you that prevents you from having any sense of the spiritual world, there's still plenty of other signs and observations and patterns and correct logic that give you enough information. You know, I just don't. And the thing is, you don't even have to take it seriously. Nobody takes it seriously anymore. I mean, like I believe Mike Cernovich once said, it's impossible to be an atheist once you learn about Pizzagate. Sir Hamster's correct. There's no evidence is a sad tale of thoughtless atheism. You have to be. I mean, I don't even know how low your IQ has to be to actually say something like that. Understand what you're saying and mean it, because you're redefining the term. You literally have to redefine the term evidence to exclude most of what is considered actual evidence in order to say that. It's crazy. Pug Fugly Bear sends a super chat. Thank you. All math errors I make are clearly due to the presence of dark numbers. Otherwise, I'd be wrong. Yeah, we should really teach the kids to utilize that. You know, if nothing else, it would help them understand science. You know, I think it's funny too that if you look up a term dark vapor. I invented the concept of dark vapor, and I think they actually eventually found it or something. I can't remember what, but it was just hilarious. And of course, how did I know that it existed? Because it has nothing to do with physics, and it has everything to do with people. If they're already having to invent epicycles to explain their observations, when they make more observations, they're going to be wrong, and they're going to need a new epicycle. Yeah, this isn't even difficult. It's so obvious. But anyhow, so let's review the 3 stages of social maturity. Number 1, you care about what others think. Number 2, you don't care about what others think. Number 3, you learn to comport yourself in a manner that will allow other people to believe that you care what they think. Um, Maybe there are more levels. I don't know. I don't pretend to be the Zen master here. Um, but this is just what I've observed, um, not just in myself, but in others as they go along the way. You know, I told you some stories about my grandfather, but just in case you're not sufficiently impressed with him as a person, let me tell you one more story. When I was in college, I used to spend a lot of time down at their house. You know, they just had this wonderful house in Alexandria, Virginia. It was like an oasis of peace and tranquility. Um, some of my favorite times in my life are were in Alexandria, just spending time with them. You know, it wasn't like we you know talked a lot or played games or anything. I used to have or not, I had the original squad leader. Like I'd set it up in the basement and play it by myself. Um, Surface occasionally. My grandmother would paint. Um, you know, my grandfather and I would watch Georgetown basketball in the evenings. Um, it's fantastic. And we'd sit there at dinner, having dinner, and my grandmother, uh, who eventually developed Alzheimer's, um, she she might have had some very early onset stage of it at that point in time. I don't think so though. I think this is just regular, normal human, not you know, either not realizing or not caring that the people you're talking to have already heard this story before. And so she would tell these stories about her friends or people that we knew, um, and she was a very uh, social, likable, lovable woman. Um, and she was really the unusual thing about her as a grandmother is that she was actually cool. Like we had a party once, and it was like a bunch of people, psychosonic, downtown models, the gangs from the nightclub, the cool people, from downtown. And this girl came up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, is that your mother? She's so cool. I mean, just she's like dressed all in black with these boots up to her knees and all this sort of thing." And I turned around expecting to see my mother, and it's my grandmother. I said, "Oh, that's not my mother. That's my grandmother." The girl said, "Excuse me, I have to go kill myself." It's bad enough to be outcooled by somebody's mom, but by their grandmother is just too much. Anyhow, so she's telling these stories, and they're funny. But I would I had this tendency to she'd tell a story, and she told me that like 2 days ago or something, or a week ago, and my inclination would be to say, yeah, I know you told me that before, right? Um, but I learned to stop doing that with her just because of the example of my grandfather and something he told me. We were sitting there, and she would tell a story, and it was something that I had heard before several times. I know that he'd probably heard it at least 3 times more, maybe 10 times more. But here's the thing: he would listen and he would laugh as if it was the first time he'd heard the story. And I couldn't figure out how he did it. Like, how do you do that? Why do you do that? Did you forget? Did you forget? So one day, after she had told us a story that we'd all heard before, And he laughed just like he'd never heard it before. And we were walking out in the garden. I said, how is it that I said, you'd heard that story before, hadn't you? He said, oh yeah, of course. I said, well, how do you listen to it like that? Um, like, doesn't it bother you? And he said, no, not at all. I said, why not? And his extremely wise and, frankly, to me, this is like practically Buddha level uh, enlightenment, is he said, well, she enjoys telling it. Yes, he did know Chesty Puller. Um, and to me, that is the epitome of the third stage of social maturity. To sacrifice your own interests for that of another. And if you can do that, my grandfather wasn't sitting there being agitated and annoyed because he'd heard it before. He was sitting there genuinely enjoying it because my grandmother was enjoying telling it. And so, he was a role model in a lot of ways, especially in the ways of the warrior. But I think that was probably one of the most profound lessons that he ever taught me. It's not something it's something that I very much doubt I would have ever come to on my own. And it's certainly something that I haven't mastered in any way, shape, or form, as anyone who knows me could tell you. But at least once we're aware of that third stage, we can at least hope to work towards it and achieve it even in small doses once in a while. So, I'm Vox Day. This is the Darkstream.